Admiral Jack Mitchell stood at the center of the USS Resolute's bridge, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Before him, the tactical display glowed ominously, a sea of crimson dots representing the Zalroth Armada, surrounding the much smaller cluster of blue icons that made up the United Terran Fleet. The odds were worse than dire. 2,000 enemy warships, Commander Sarah Carter muttered beside him, fingers flying across her console, against 200 of ours. Correction, Lieutenant Jake Jinx Dawson called from the comms station, voice edged with amusement. 198, just lost the Santiago and the Vanguard. That's not helping, Jinx, Sarah snapped. Neither is counting, but you're doing it anyway. Mitchell allowed himself a small smirk. Gallows humor, the last luxury of the desperate. He turned his attention back to the screen. The Zalroth, a species bred for conquest, had never known defeat in open space. Their doctrine was simple: overwhelm, crush, erase. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't leave survivors. Mitchell intended to become the first exception. Fleet-wide broadcast, he said. The comms officer nodded. A second later, his voice echoed across every Terran vessel. Listen up. The Zalroth believe this is already over. They see our numbers, our position, and they think we're done. He let that sink in. They don't understand us. They don't understand that humans never die quietly. They don't understand what happens when you push a species that's built its entire existence on adapting, surviving, and punching above its weight. A pause. Then he added almost lightly, "Let's give them a history lesson." The response came in the form of 1,000 voices roaring in unison across the fleet. Mitchell looked at Sarah. "Initiate pattern ghost." Sarah didn't hesitate. She input the command, and across the fleet ships powered down non-essential systems. Their heat signatures, mass readings, and EM emissions shifted, creating the illusion that they were drifting wrecks. The Zalroth, for all their military might, relied on predictability. They expected battles to unfold in standard formations with standard tactics. What they didn't expect was for the enemy to vanish in the middle of a fight. Seconds passed, then a minute. The Zalroth hesitated. "Gotcha," Mitchell muttered. "Jinx, take your squadron out there. Give 'em something to shoot at." "With pleasure," Jinx grinned. He launched his fighter from the hangar, his squadron following suit. The moment they activated their engines, Zalroth weapons opened fire, focusing on the small, fast-moving targets. "Now!" Mitchell barked. The Terran fleet sprang back to life, weapons blazing. Capital ships unleashed concentrated salvos on exposed Zalroth formations, while strike craft darted through the chaos, exploiting the enemy's confusion. The Zalroth had counted on brute force. They hadn't counted on human deception. Jinx whooped as he weaved through enemy fire, juking between debris and plasma bursts. "Not so scary when you're scrambling, huh?" He spun his fighter through the narrow gap between two Zalroth cruisers, locking onto a vulnerable engine core. "Fox 3! His missile streaked forward, detonating in a fiery explosion that sent the cruiser spiraling into its allies. Back on the Resolute, Sarah kept the systems balanced on a knife's edge, rerouting power wherever it was needed most. "Shields at 60% and dropping fast. Just hold them a little longer," Mitchell said. Dr. Emily Lawson, seated at the far end of the bridge, was doing something strange. As Zalroth ships exploded into the void, she murmured under her breath, "Zalroth vessel Grathnak, destroyed. Zalroth vessel Janeth, destroyed." Mitchell shot her a glance. "What are you doing?" "Recording their names," she replied simply. Mitchell frowned. "Why?" "Because they expect us to forget them," she said, still watching the battle unfold. "But history remembers. Even enemies deserve to be remembered." Mitchell didn't have time to process that. The Zalroth were regrouping. Their initial shock was wearing off, and now they were adapting. "They're shifting tactics," Sarah warned. "They're focusing fire on our command ships. They're trying to—" The Resolute shuddered violently. Alarms blared. A direct hit. Mitchell braced himself. "Damage report. Portside batteries offline," Sarah grimaced. "Shields at 20%. Jinx, I need you to—" Already on it, boss, Jinx cut in. But I'm out of missiles and my right wing is kinda missing. Then improvise. Improvise, he says, Jinx muttered. Then over the squadron channel. All right, team, new plan. We're going manual. Jinx led his squadron into a high-speed strafing run, using nothing but their ship hulls and kinetic impact to clip enemy formations. The Zalroth, unused to such reckless audacity, struggled to counter. Mitchell saw the shift and made a call. All ships converge on the Zalroth command carrier. We take that out, we break their coordination. Sarah hesitated. That's suicide. Mitchell's grin was sharp. Only if we fail. The fleet rallied, engines burning bright. Zalroth defenses intensified, but humanity's greatest weapon wasn't firepower. It was determination. Jinx, pushing his battered fighter beyond its limits, targeted the command carrier's sensor array. I got something. For ya. He ejected his last explosive charge directly into the exposed core. A heartbeat. Then, a blinding detonation as the Zalroth command carrier erupted into debris. Silence filled the void. Then, chaos. With their central command obliterated, the Zalroth fleet hesitated, then fractured. Terran warships pressed the advantage, driving deep into the disarrayed enemy lines. Sarah exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. They're breaking. Mitchell allowed himself a slow nod. Good. Behind him, Dr. Lawson continued her quiet. Recitation. Zalroth vessel Kernat, destroyed. Zalroth vessel Chiloth, destroyed. Mitchell didn't stop her. They had won this engagement. But the war was far from over. Admiral Jack Mitchell knew this better than most. The Zalroth command carrier was gone, its wreckage drifting in the void, but the battle was far from over. Even without centralized orders, thousands of Zalroth vessels still remained, and their instinct for bloodshed and revenge was hardwired into their very biology. Mitchell gripped the console as the USS Resolute rocked under another impact. They're hitting us harder, Commander Sarah Carter reported, voice tight. Whatever confusion we bought ourselves is running out. On the main tactical display, the Zalroth formations were shifting. Their fleet wasn't collapsing. It was mutating, like a severed limb regenerating. Clusters of warships were rallying around secondary command nodes, new flagships taking control. They weren't retreating, they were adapting. Mitchell exhaled slowly. So much for easy victories. All right, he said. Time for a new plan. Lieutenant Jake, Jinx. Dawson's voice crackled over the comms. Please tell me this. Plan involves me not getting shot at. Mitchell smirked. You volunteering for a desk job, Jinx? Never mind. I take it back. Let's get shot at. Mitchell turned to Sarah. How bad are we? She scanned the damage reports. Fleet-wide, 72 ships still operational, 30 in critical condition, 14 down. Shields across the board are below 40%, and we're low. On torpedoes. So we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Scraping through the bottom of the barrel, she corrected grimly. Mitchell nodded, already forming contingencies. They had one shot to shift momentum. If they failed, the Zalroth would grind them down to dust. Where's our opening? He asked. Dr. Emily Lawson, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Here. She gestured to the tactical display, highlighting a narrow corridor of debris, a chaotic graveyard of destroyed ships, both human and Zalroth. They won't follow us through that mess, she said. Their fleet is too rigid, too predictable. We can use it. Sarah frowned. It's a kill box. Exactly, Lawson said. For them. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting we bait them in? Not all of them, Lawson clarified. Just enough to turn the tide. Jinx's voice chimed in. Let me guess, I'm the bait? Only if you're fast, Mitchell said. Jinx snorted. I was born fast, Sarah sighed. That's not even remotely true. Mitchell grinned. Get moving, Jinx. Jinx's fighter blasted forward, weaving through wreckage at breakneck speed. Behind him, a squadron of Zalroth interceptors raced after him, their weapons spitting plasma fire through the debris field. He juked left, then right, narrowly avoiding a half-shattered Terran cruiser that still had active fuel leaks. A stray shot from the pursuing Zalroth ignited the vapor, triggering a violent chain reaction that engulfed several of his pursuers. Jinx whooped. "You guys really gotta stop shooting yourselves." Less gloating, more surviving, Sarah's voice cut in over the comms. Jinx grinned, but his eyes stayed locked on his trajectory. This was the hard part, leading them just far enough in without getting himself vaporized. As the chase continued, the Resolute and the rest of the Terran fleet moved into position, lining up their weapons along the edges of the debris field. Mitchell gave the order. "All ships, fire at will." The void erupted. From hidden vantage points, Terran warships unleashed everything they had, their firepower ripping into the Zalroth pursuers from multiple angles. The enemy fleet, having pushed too deep, suddenly found themselves trapped, unable to maneuver through the chaos. One by one, Zalroth ships detonated, their overconfidence turning into utter ruin. Jinx pulled up hard, escaping the kill zone, just in time to see the carnage unfold behind him. "Hot damn," he breathed. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss." Mitchell allowed himself a small smile. The tide had shifted again. Even as their ranks thinned, their rage only grew. Sarah cursed. "More ships incoming. Too many." Mitchell clenched his jaw. If the Zalroth committed their full strength now, the Terran fleet wouldn't last another hour. They needed another edge. And then, surprisingly, it came from Lawson. She had been whispering again, reciting ship names, but now her voice wasn't just recording. It was broadcasting. Mitchell blinked. "What are you doing?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Changing the rules." Across open comm channels, not just Terran, but Zalroth frequencies, her voice rang out. "Zalroth vessel Grathnak, destroyed. Zalroth vessel Jarnath, destroyed. Zalroth vessel Kurnath, destroyed." Mitchell frowned. The Zalroth did not have names for their ships, not the way humans did. Their war vessels were numbers, cold classifications. Yet somehow Lawson had found their true names, buried in old records, forgotten even by their own kind. And the Zalroth were listening. "They never name their dead," she continued softly. "They erase them, as if they never existed. We do the opposite, we remember." There was a shift in the enemy fleet, hesitation, confusion. Sarah stared at the tactical display. "What the hell? Some of them are breaking formation." Jinx sounded bewildered. "Are they retreating?" Mitchell didn't understand. He turned to Lawson. "Why is this working?" She met his gaze. "Because for the first time in their history, they're hearing proof that their own people existed, that someone, even an enemy, remembers them. The Zalroth lived by destruction, by forgetting. But now they were hearing the names of the fallen, spoken aloud, and some of them, just enough of them, were faltering." Mitchell saw the opening. "Sarah, mark the ships breaking formation. Those are the ones we press." She nodded. "On it." The fleet adjusted, focusing fire on the still hostile Zalroth, while leaving the shaken ones untouched. The battlefield had shifted again. "Mitchell," Gex hailed. For the first time, the Zalroth weren't just fighting a battle, they were questioning their very existence, and that meant humanity still had a chance. Like the universe itself was holding its breath. Admiral Jack Mitchell's gaze was fixed on the tactical display. Something unprecedented was happening. The Zalroth fleet was splitting, not in the organized, methodical way they had before. This was hesitation, fragmentation, doubt. A rift was forming among them, raw and exposed. Some Zalroth ships continued their relentless assault, but others were drifting, their weapons silent. Mitchell turned to Dr. Emily Lawson, who had started it all with her unnerving, relentless recitation. "Keep going," he ordered. She nodded and continued speaking, her voice calm, unwavering. "Zalroth. Vessel Chiloth, destroyed. Zalroth vessel Jalvunak, destroyed." Each name sent another small shockwave through the enemy fleet. Lieutenant Jake Jinx Dawson, still in his fighter, watched from the front lines. "Boss, some of them are turning away, not running, just stopping." Mitchell's gut told him what this meant. They're listening, Commander Sarah Carter was still skeptical. So what? They suddenly grow a conscience? No, Lawson said. They're realizing they don't have to fight. The Zalroth were a war species. Their history was one of conquest, of consuming and erasing all who stood before them. But now, for the first time, they were hearing proof that their own kind, dead and forgotten, had names. Proof that they too were more than just weapons, and some of them, just enough, were hesitating. But not all. Sarah's console blared a new warning. "We've got a problem," she said sharply. "A big problem." On the tactical display, a new icon emerged, a monolithic Zalroth dreadnought, larger than anything they'd faced so far. It was advancing fast, cutting through debris like a scythe. Jinx let out a low whistle. "That thing is at least 10 times the size of the Resolute." Mitchell clenched his jaw. He knew what this meant. The Zalroth had seen the hesitation spreading through their ranks, and they were sending something to put an end to it. The Zalroth dreadnought was a terrifying sight, black as a dead star, its surface a shifting, organic nightmare of plated armor. Its weapons flared, a single broadside annihilating an entire Terran cruiser in one shot. Sarah swore under her breath. "That thing could tear through our fleet alone." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Then we don't fight it head-on." Jinx's voice crackled over the comms. "Oh, so I don't have to ram it? Fantastic." Lawson, still studying the Zalroth, reactions spoke up. "It's not just here to destroy us, it's here to restore order. The hesitant ones, the ones breaking formation, they're going to be forced back into the fight." Mitchell saw it happening in real time. The wavering Zalroth ships were being corralled, forced to choose, fall back in line, or be obliterated. By their own kind. They were losing their one advantage. "We need to take that dreadnought down," Mitchell said. Sarah stared at him. "With what?" Mitchell exhaled. "We'll figure something out." Jinx, still circling in his damaged fighter, chimed in. "If I may, I think I have the beginnings of an incredibly stupid plan." Mitchell glanced at Sarah, then back to the comms. "Jinx, I swear if this plan involves you flying into something that explodes—" "Well, it's not entirely that," Jinx admitted. "But hear me out." Mitchell listened, adjusted the plan, and gave the order. Moments later, the battlefield shifted once again. Jinx and his squadron streaked toward the dreadnought, baiting its attention. The massive warship turned its weapons on them, unleashing a storm of plasma fire. But it was too late to stop what came next. While the dreadnought focused on the fighters, the Resolute and a select group of human and hesitant Zalroth ships launched their real attack. Jinx's voice was pure adrenaline. "Okay, I'd like to formally retract my plan because this thing is very much trying to kill me." Mitchell smirked. "Too late. Full send." The Resolute fired a concentrated burst of ion disruptors, shorting out the dreadnought's external weapons for a precious few seconds. That was all they needed. Jinx and his squadron veered upward, clearing a path just in time for 2 captured Zalroth warships, now controlled by defectors, to slam into the dreadnought's vulnerable midsection. The EE's impact was catastrophic. The dreadnought buckled, its armor shredding open from the collision. Mitchell seized the moment. "Resolute, fire everything we have." Every remaining Terran warship unleashed their payload, torpedoes, plasma cannons, railguns, a final brutal salvo that ripped into the exposed core of the dreadnought. A single crackling pause. Then, in a detonation that shook the battlefield, the Zalroth dreadnought erupted into a sun-bright explosion. The shockwave tore through the Zalroth fleet, sending their now leaderless forces into utter chaos. For the first time, the Zalroth weren't just losing a battle, they were collapsing. Mitchell exhaled. They had done it, but then Lawson whispered something that made him pause. "They're not retreating." Mitchell's eyes snapped to the tactical display. She was right. The remaining Zalroth weren't fleeing. Some were surrendering. Others were simply powering down their weapons. The battlefield had gone from war zone to something else entirely. Jinx, circling above the wreckage, summed it up best. So, what now? The battlefield was eerily still. Drifting wreckage formed a vast graveyard around the USS Resolute, silent monuments to the carnage that had unfolded. Human and Zalroth vessels alike lay shattered, their husks reflecting the dim light of a dying star. But it was not victory that made Mitchell pause. It was the silence from the Zalroth. Across the remaining enemy fleet, engines had powered down, weapons deactivated. Some ships were broadcasting hailing signals, an act no Zalroth had ever attempted before. Others simply waited, as if struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. Mitchell turned to Sarah. "Open a wideband frequency." She hesitated, then nodded. "You think they're ready to talk?" Mitchell exhaled. "I think they don't know what else to do." The comms flickered to life, and for the first time in recorded history, a Zalroth voice spoke to a human in peace. "Why? Do you remember our dead?" The voice was deep, guttural, filled with something foreign, something Mitchell had never expected to hear from a Zalroth. Doubt. Lawson stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Because they lived." A pause. Then, "They were weapons. They had no names." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "That's a lie, you were told." There was another silence, longer this time. Then, "And yet you spoke them." Mitchell could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The Zalroth had never questioned their war, never questioned their purpose. But now, their dead had names, and that changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, it meant the war was over. Not all the Zalroth had surrendered. Sarah's console blinked with new data. "We have movement," she said sharply. "Several ships are breaking formation, heading toward the core of the wreckage field." Mitchell frowned. Deserters. Jinx, still in his battered fighter, ran a scan. "Not exactly. I think they're choosing exile." Lawson's expression darkened. "Some of them still believe in the war. They won't accept what's happening." Mitchell nodded. "Then we let them go." Sarah turned to him in surprise. "We're just letting them run? If we chase them down, we become exactly what they were," Mitchell said. "Let them make their choice." Sarah hesitated, then gave a slow nod. For once, humanity wasn't the one deciding how this ended. The war hadn't been won through superior firepower. It had been won through memory, through names. And in its wake, the Zalroth were left to decide who they would be now that they knew the truth. Hours later, the fleet drifted in a state of uncertainty and exhaustion. They had survived, but survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of something far more complicated. Jinx's voice crackled over the comms. "So, does this mean we get a party or what?" Mitchell smirked. "I think we just barely avoided dying." "Give it a minute." Jinx laughed. "Hey, near-death experiences deserve a toast." Lawson's voice cut in softer. "We should toast to them." Mitchell glanced at her. "The fallen?" She nodded. "Both sides." She stepped forward, accessing the fleet-wide comms. And then, one last time, she spoke the names of the dead. This time, no one interrupted. The Zalroth listened, and for the first time in their long history, they remembered. Weeks later, in the records of the Terran Alliance, a simple note was added to the official report of the battle. "The Zalroth do not forget their dead anymore, and neither do we.